The scouts came back with a description that made no sense. Not elves, wrong height, wrong ears, wrong smell entirely. No trace of forest, bond or shadow. We've none of the cold magic. Scent that clings to the pale ones even when they are trying to be invisible. Not dwarves either. Too tall, too lean. Built without that particular density that makes a dwarf feel like hitting a wall even when you outweigh them. Not anything with a name in the Greywood clan's memory. And the Greywood clan had been in these forests for 400 years and had names for most things. Rounded ears, the scouts said. Soft-looking. Short hair on the men, sometimes long on the women. None of the ritual patterns that mark a warrior people. They carried iron. That much was familiar, but they wore it without ceremony. The way you wear a tool. They moved like nothing special. Gorak Ashenmar would make them bleed like nothing special. Gorak listened to this report and felt something adjacent to contempt. Whatever they were, they had anchored in the clan's bay, the Winter Shellfish Bay, the one the Eastern Patrol had used for 3 generations, and walked ashore as if shore was simply available to whoever arrived at it first. 60 souls disembarked, Gorak was told, then 100, then more. Children, elderly, people being carried on stretchers made from sail canvas, which told you everything about the condition of this fleet and the people aboard it. He counted 400 before he stopped counting. He estimated 80 who looked capable of a fight. He noted 3 who moved differently from the rest. 2 men and a woman older, unhurried, walking the beach while their people wept around them. One of them, the broader of the 2 men, with the deliberate movements of someone who gives orders for a living, crouched at one point and pressed his palm flat against the sand. Held it there, rose and said something to the woman beside him. Gorak filed the image somewhere and did not examine it. Whatever these soft-eared, magic-less creatures were, they had made a mistake in choosing this bay. Not because the Greywood clan was cruel, though they could be, but because precedent is a living thing, and if you allow one exhausted fleet of unknown creatures to walk ashore in your territory without consequence, you have said something to every creature watching. You have said, "This shore is available." Gorak was not willing to say that. He gave the order for dawn and went to sleep without difficulty. The Greywood at night makes sounds. Gorak woke twice before dawn to sounds from the beach direction, organized, rhythmic, the kind that comes from coordinated work rather than crisis. He saw fires, cold people. Wet wood, a first night in a strange place. They emerged from the tree line at dawn in good order, 58 warriors moving through the last of the dark with the quiet efficiency of a patrol that had made this walk many times before. The beach lay grey and flat ahead. Tide pulled back 5 ships sitting quiet in the harbor, morning light at their backs. Open ground ahead. Then he saw the palisade, not 1 wall, 2. The outer one was rough, angled timber, gaps still visible, built fast by people working without enough light. The kind of wall that says we knew you were coming without saying we were ready for you. 30 meters behind it, tighter, lower, built from timber that Gorak would later recognize as stripped directly from one of the ship's hulls, stood a second line. Smaller, denser, the space between them swept clean and flat. One of his lieutenants said they built this overnight. Gorak said nothing. He ordered the attack because retreat had never lived comfortably in his vocabulary, and because 60 warriors against a half-finished wall built by soft-eared refugees still read the same way it had the night before. The outer wall disagreed. The humans behind it fought in tight rotations. Defenders dropping back every few minutes, replaced by fresh ones from the inner line, managing the defense the way you manage a resource you intend to conserve. When Gorak's warriors pressed the eastern section, the defense compressed and held. When they pulled back to regroup, the humans did not pursue. They stepped back one measured pace and waited. And all the while, behind the outer wall, figures were crossing the open ground between the 2 palisades in deliberate groups. Not wounded, not panicking. Armed fighters moving in calm rotation toward the surf. They were already leaving, not fleeing. Rotating out, the humans at the front line were not holding the outer wall because they believed it would hold. They were holding it because it needed to hold long enough. The outer wall fell when Gorak committed his full weight. 30 warriors hitting the eastern section at once. 3 of his men went down in the breach from arrows fired at close range through the gaps, and the timber buckled, and his warriors poured through into the cleared ground between the 2 lines. 9 down now, 49 standing. The humans who had been staffing the outer palisade were not retreating to the inner wall. They were running for the surf. All of them at once, coordinated by a single word called from somewhere Gorak could not locate, not panicked, not screaming, a word that sounded almost administrative. And they ran in a tight, disciplined stream toward the waterline, angling so that the curve of the bay sat on both flanks, the ocean wrapping around the ends of the beach, so that going around it would cost his warriors 30 seconds of broken surf, running that would strip them of speed and footing. The bay had been chosen for exactly this reason. Gorak ordered the charge to the inner wall because 49 warriors against whatever remained was still a number that made sense, and because fury and momentum are not things that stop easily once they are moving. The inner wall held 4 minutes. The humans left at the inner palisade were the last 15, packed into a tight space with no room to be pushed from angles, defending a front so narrow that his warriors' numbers meant nothing. They fought without shouting, without the sounds Gorak had heard in 100 engagements from people who were scared and making noise to cover it. These people made sounds like craftsmen, short, functional, and once, improbably, something that in another context would have been a laugh. He lost 6 more warriors at the inner wall. Then the word came again, the same word, called from somewhere, and the 15 turned and ran for the surf, and Gorak gave chase with what remained of his war party, because he had 34 warriors and 15 humans running for open water, and the logic of the chase said finish it. The humans hit the surf and kept going, waded to their knees, their waists. Small, flat-bottomed boats were waiting beyond the break line, already manned, already positioned. The humans reached them and climbed in fast, too fast, practiced, and the boats backed further into the swells. Gorak's warriors slowed at the water's edge. The ocean is not where you run to escape. This is not a principle of war. It is a fact understood by every living thing that has ever been chased. You run for cover, for high ground, for the tree line at your back. You do not run into open water. Open water is where things go to die without witness. For a long moment, what remained of his war party stood at the surf line and watched the small boat settle into position just past where the waves broke. The boat stopped. They did not flee further. They sat in the swells with the patience of something that had arrived exactly where it intended to be. Gorak had one clear moment to understand what was about to happen. The volley came. 40 bows releasing in a rhythm that was not panic, but measured, unhurried work. 34 warriors standing in the open on flat beach with no cover, no angle, no surf they could charge through at speed. The archers had elevation from the rise and fall of the swells. They did not rush. They did not need to. They had looked at an ocean and seen a wall. Gorak took an arrow through the meat of his left shoulder and turned and screamed the retreat and ran, and what remained of 60 warriors followed him into the tree line, and the boat's rhythm continued behind them, patient, unbroken, until the trees closed and the sound stopped. He pressed his back against an oak and breathed and looked back at the beach. The small boats were already rowing to shore, unhurried. They beached them in a line, and the humans climbed out and walked back toward the palisade without looking at the tree line. The woman from the previous evening was already at the outer breach, already directing repairs, before the last boat cleared the waterline. They looked like people finishing a task. Gorak stood in the shadow of the Greywood and bled, and tried to find a word for what he was feeling. And while he searched, he watched the humans work and tried again to name what they were. Not elves. Elves carry magic like weather, a pressure in the air around them, cold and deep. These people carried nothing. No scent of root or shadow, no communion with stone or tide, nothing that the old races lean on like a second spine. They were bare in a way that should have made them fragile. Not dwarves. Dwarves fight like stone, immovable, positional, making you come to them on ground they have prepared for a generation. These people had been on this shore for one night, and they had reed the bay, stripped their own ships for lumber, built 2 walls in the dark, and designed a retreat that used the ocean as a weapon. Something in between and nothing like either. Soft-looking, short-lived probably by every sign. He had seen no elders among the fighters, nothing of the deep time patience that makes the ancient races difficult to kill in the ways that matter. These people would age. They would die. In 100 years there would be different faces on this beach. He was not sure that made them less dangerous. He was becoming less sure of that by the moment. The man who had crouched on the sand and pressed his palm flat against the beach. He understood it now. The man had been reading the ground the way a builder reads a surface before he begins. He had been standing on this shore for the first time in his life, surrounded by grieving people and sail canvas, and the sick being carried off his ships, and he had been calculating surf depth and boat position and sight lines. They had arrived already planning for an attack that hadn't happened yet. They had looked at foreign ground they had never stood on before, and immediately begun turning it into something that would be hard to take from them. Gorak had come to this beach to send a message. He turned and looked at what remained of his war party. 21 warriors standing, the rest dead or 2 wounded to count on. On the shore behind him, one of the humans paused in the work of repairing the outer breach. He looked at the tree line for a long moment. Directly at it, without flinching, as if he knew exactly where 21 orc warriors were standing and bleeding in the shadow of the oaks. Then he turned back to the wall and kept working. Gorak had come to this shore to send a message. Standing in the tree line with an arrow in his shoulder and 21 warriors at his back, he understood that a message had indeed been sent. He was no longer certain he was the one who had sent it.